This is going to be an annotation walkthrough video for Bayonet Charge by Ted Hughes. So we've got to go through our steps. We've got to read through the poem first of all and think about what is actually happening. Then we're going to go through our masts techniques, so our metaphors, alliteration, adjectives, similes, triplets, and also our sensory language. And this one is particularly good for sensory language. Hughes uses a lot of very clear and effective vocabulary. Then we're going to look at the structure of the poem, the form it takes, and then finally try and link it to context. So let's start by reading through, and after each stanza we'll pause so we can summarise what it is that's happening in that stanza. So, suddenly he awoke and was running. Raw in raw-seamed hot khaki, his sweat heavy, stumbling across a field of clods towards a green hedge that dazzled with rifle fire. Hearing bullets smacking the belly out of the air, he lugged a rifle, numb as a smashed arm, the patriotic tear that had brimmed in his eye, sweating like molten iron from the centre of his chest. There is an enjambment here and we'll come back to this, but for now we've got a battle situation in the first section. And there is conflict, imminent conflict straight away. He's in the midst of it. Okay, so then we have our second stanza. In bewilderment, then he almost stopped. In what cold clockwork of the stars and the nations was he the hand pointing that second? He was running like a man who has jumped up in the dark and runs listening between his footfalls for the reason of his still running, and his foot hung like statuary in a mid-stride. Then the shot slashed furrows, and again we've got another enjambment. So here he's confused. He's almost perhaps shell-shocked. He's not sure anymore what on earth is going on, what he's running from. He's just terrified. And that terror comes through. Then the final stanza we have, continuing on from this enjambment, threw up a yellow hair that rolled like a flame and crawled in a threshing circle, its mouth wide, open silent, its eyes standing out. He plunged past with his bayonet toward the green hedge, king, honour, human dignity, etc., dropped like luxuries and yelling alarm to get out of that blue crackling air, his terrors touchy dynamite. So in this one we've got natural imagery being used to communicate that actually the only thing that this soldier is going to do is to die. He's lost his humanity. Okay, so now we have the poem overall. We need to have a look at our masts techniques, and then we'll have a look at the structure, form and context. So straight away we start with this adverb. Okay, so we're starting perhaps in medias res, which means in the middle of the action. Okay, and that will be something we'll come back to with the structural comments that we make. He was running, past tense, he was, but we're still feeling the immediacy of it. And then he's raw in raw-seamed hot khaki. We've got this sensory language showing his passion, almost feverish actions, okay, which could suggest the madness of people being kept on edge constantly in war. The verbs in this are really, really important. So we've started with he was running, he awoke. We've got the fact that he's stumbling across the field. If we just take the verbs from this, dazzled, smacking, lugged, smashed, although in this case smashed is actually an adjective. It brimmed in his eye. So all the way through here these verbs are creating the movement, but they're also creating a fearful tone. So we've got the movement, we've got the kind of violence being created, but there's also a fearful tone. And something that you'll notice when you look at the poem as a whole, we spoke about the enjambment at the end of the stanzas, but this tone is carried on, so the language that carries on further, actually the verbs are important too. So then we've got, again, he was running, he stopped, okay, pointing, jumped, listening, hung. So we've got all of these ideas, and actually the tone throughout, if we're looking just at the verbs, that is where it is. We've got that it threw up a yellow hair, rolled like a flame, crawled, standing out. Again, this idea of sort of words that are normally used as verbs being transformed, so everything is to do with the action. This idea of something being dropped. He needs to get out. Okay, so the language throughout creates a tone. If we go for specifics though, we've got some really effective use of metaphorical language, similes, metaphors. Okay, so we've got this idea of like a flame, this simile. Okay, hung like statuary, like a man who has jumped. So these similes, these comparisons, you could talk about the fact that actually he can't think straight, he can't say what it is, he almost can't put his finger on it. So it shows that kind of state of emotion where he is confused, he is in bewilderment, as it states. Okay, in terms of the way that metaphors and symbolism is used, this idea that he stopped, in what cold clockwork of the stars and the nations was he the hand pointing that second. So actually this idea of clockwork of stars, this inevitability, okay, got this metaphor here, but also it's not just of the stars, it's of nations. So this isn't a natural issue, this is man's fault. These choices have been made by politicians. So as you can see, the language is packed full in here. If we think about the structure, structurally we've got lots of pauses, okay, lots of caesura, and actually this is similar to the comparison of his emotion with the similes. There is a constant movement, this pace is really quick. So suddenly he awoke and was running, in raw seamed hot khaki and his sweat heavy, stumbling across a field. There is no full stop, no end to a sentence until here, halfway through the poem. Then we get another here, okay, and then we start to slow down a little bit more. We've got a few more pauses. Something else that structurally is really interesting to comment on is this list here, okay. So we've got this asyndetic list, and he's listing these things that the soldier has dropped: king, honour, human dignity, etc. Actually, these are crucial things. The reason that people signed up for war was because of their patriotism, because of their belief in their country. And yet, although king comes first and then honour, human dignity comes last, and etc. really kind of throws this away. So we've got all of these ideas, and it's the listing that makes them stand out, is that structural comment that you could make. Finally, if we think in terms of the context of this particular poem, we've got Ted Hughes, whose father actually fought during the war, and so this isn't a first person persona necessarily. He might be repeating stories that he's heard as a child, but the dramatic kind of presentation would have been something that could be related to by many soldiers. The ideas within this are very representative of many soldiers' experiences, and therefore this poem could be very good to compare with others that address war directly. Things, for example, like Exposure, where the war is a background and really the weather is the enemy, would be a really good one to contrast this with. Or perhaps something like Storm on the Island, where you've got the natural and the conflict of man juxtaposed and kind of intertwined with one another. I hope this video was helpful.